As I said earlier, we have some serious challenges ahead of us. The city is becoming divided and disconnected, largely between the inner suburbs and downtown. And we see this story playing itself out in the current municipal election. This is a story within the bigger story that I'm telling you today. It's the story of the emergence of the three cities of Toronto: the wealthy inner core, the diminishing middle-income neighborhoods, and the struggling inner suburbs of the northeast and the northwest in Toronto. In 1970, 66% of Toronto neighborhoods were middle income. In 2005, that 66% has become 29%. What happened? They did not all move to the 905. Over the 35-year period between 1970 and 2005 was a time of great economic growth in Toronto. But let's look a little bit more at that. Over that time, the number of very high-income neighborhoods, we call that City 1, that doubled as a percentage and went from 7% to 15%. The number of middle-income neighborhoods, City 2, they were cut in half. And the low or very low-income neighborhoods, City 3, they went from 20% of all neighborhoods to currently over 50% of these neighborhoods. City 3 now makes up 43% of all Torontonians. Do the math. That's over 1 million people. 1 million people, two-thirds of whom are visible minorities. They're largely disconnected from public transit, and they are struggling in the very basics. And I want to touch on those basics: housing, food, and work. First, for housing. Earlier, we spoke about all of the great things that we're doing in Toronto, how highly ranked we are. Well, we're 215th internationally for housing affordability. Last year, we moved from seriously unaffordable into the category of severely unaffordable. What does that mean? Well, in the mid-1990s, for every 2 families looking for affordable housing, there was 1 unit on the market. By the time we get to the middle of this decade, it's 7 families chasing 1 unit of affordable housing on the market. And this has ripple effects. I want to touch on one of them. It's food. Half of Toronto lives in a food desert. 51% of Torontonians live in a food desert. That's an area where there's no grocery store within a 1-kilometer radius. So low-income residents, particularly those in the inner suburbs, they often don't have cars. It's difficult to access public transit. They go to the easier access of convenience stores and fast food outlets. And one of the results in this is truly startling. In Toronto, 1/3 of all children between the ages of 2 and 11 are overweight or obese, and this does not bode well for the next generation. Let's have a quick look at work. Due to a declining birth rate and aging workforce in Toronto, effective 2008 onwards, all new net growth to our labor force is going to come through immigration. But our newcomers continue to struggle. Vital Signs has noted that recent immigrants have close to double the unemployment rate of non-immigrants, and when they get hired, it's for roughly half the annual salary. That's not a good condition. So enough numbers. Let's bring it all together. The author Thoreau once said, "Life is not what you look at, but it's what do you see." So what do we see in our vital signs today? We're more prosperous. We're safer. We're greener. We are a winning city. But hold the victory lap. If you're poor, you've gotten poorer. If you're young, you're more likely to be inactive and overweight. And if you're new to this country, the recession has definitely hit you the hardest. Vital Signs reveals a city with great accomplishments and great challenges, but above all, in my view, great promise. In many ways, we are on the right track, but to borrow a phrase from my son's 5th grade class, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. If we have any expectation of remaining that winning city, folks, we can't sit still any longer. But there is something we can do about this. There are a number of actions we can take, we should take, and in my opinion, we must take in order to build the city we deserve. First of all, we badly need to reinvest in this city in 3 key areas: affordable housing, so young families can actually afford to put down roots in our city. How many times have you heard you can't afford to raise a child in the city? Well, I ask, what's a city without its children? Secondly, even more of a focus on transit. It's our circulatory system. It's old and it's clogged. We need to be able to move people and ideas and goods across this city. We need to get back to that. Infrastructure, the roads and bridges. Some of our water mains and sewers are over 100 years old. They need to be updated, and we keep putting it off at our own peril. Secondly, we need to recognize that we're in a competition for global business as well as global talent. G7 nations are all facing declining birth rates and aging populations. We cannot continue to take highly skilled foreign talent for granted. Benign neglect is not a winning strategy. We're in a competition, let's act like it. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the times call for a special type of leader, a mayor who can think globally and act globally. The days of fixing potholes alone is long, long behind us. We need a mayor who can build bridges that will connect us with this rapidly evolving and growing global village. So, how do we make this happen? Well, we can only make it happen when we stop thinking of ourselves in terms of us and them. So let's start with our governments. The senior levels of government. They must provide additional tools to Toronto to raise revenue beyond just the property tax base, so we can begin to share equitably in the very economic growth created by the city, in the city, so we can invest in the city. We must continue to remind our political leaders that these vital signs that I'm speaking of are not just city issues, but are matters that go to the very heart of Canada's social and economic future. The health of this city is a national issue and must not be ignored. To the city, don't just wait. The city should aggressively explore efficiencies as well as alternative methods of financing, including exploring new funding relationships with the private sector. There are no other options now. And how about Torontonians, all of us? Well, when we can finally acknowledge that running this city is so much more than running just a very big 7-Eleven, that's when we can start a real discussion about how to build a great city. A great city, a theme that has been completely lost in this current municipal election. So, this is all simple, it's just not easy. But it all starts with a new attitude towards each other, a new type of thinking, a new type of politics, and a new type of leadership. And I can best sum it up by an old saying I was recently reminded of. The hardest ship to sail is a partnership. I believe that competition may have built this city, but collaboration is our way forward. Lots of people, especially in this room, you know how to do competition. Knowing how to do cooperation, that is much, much harder. We need to find a way to reward cooperation. We have all kinds of ways to reward competition. We need to stop thinking of ourselves and our sectors as silos and walls, but rather as bridges. And never before has this opportunity been so near and the stars aligned so well. I'll tell you why. Toronto and much of the world are increasingly being built on three key foundations: the public sector, the private sector, and the philanthropic sector. Historically, each of these has had very, very different bottom lines. For business, it's profits and money. For governments, it's security and social cohesion. And for the not-for-profit sector, it's quality of life. But something changed over the last 20 years. They've begun to align with each other. Governments are now much more focused on the financial bottom line. And businesses have a mission to satisfy more than just their shareholders and their customers. And today, philanthropy is not only taking on a larger role in society, it's become a meeting place of government and business. These sectors are aligned as never before, right at the bottom line. But if the story that emerges from Vital Signs today tells us anything, is that our sectors, our efforts, our interests have to be aligned even more on a scale previously unimagined. That would happen when all of us in this room in this city decide that what the city really needs is not just new thinking, but a new attitude towards Toronto and each other. Working together is a necessary condition for building our city anew, but it's not a sufficient condition. We need to use our collective wisdom, brains, and imagination to bring forward the best ideas and make them the most workable ones. After all, you can't wring your hands and roll up your sleeves at the same time. Thank you.